Imagine a post-apocalyptic world. Beside the ruined buildings of our own civilization, St. Peter's Basilica, the Taj Mahal, those really great Art Deco skyscrapers like the Empire State Building, and even the original Penn Station, dwell savages in mud huts. The savages see the buildings every day, but they never compose legends about how they were built by the gods in a lost golden age. No, they say they themselves could totally build things just as good or better. They just choose to build mud huts instead because they're more stylish. This is a setup for what is becoming one of the most popular conspiracy theories right now, Tartaria. It is true believers say we are those savages. We live in the shadow of the Taj Mahal, Art Deco skyscrapers, etc. But our buildings look like squares with not that much attention to detail, and our structures could last about 100 years. Or as I've said in the past, those who build the more traditional, classical, and ornate buildings love us, and those who build the new so-called modern buildings hate us. It seems we suffered some kind of apocalypse 100-ish years ago. Our elites are keeping it quiet and have altered the records, but they haven't been able to destroy all the buildings of the lost world. They have tried. World War I, World War II come to mind. Their cover story is that technology and wealth levels have not returned, and those kinds of buildings have just, quote-unquote, gone out of style. People say that conspiracy theories are sometimes sublimated expressions of critiques of our society. According to a National Civic Arts Society survey, it found that Americans prefer traditional and classical buildings to modern ones by about 70% to 30%, regardless of political affiliation. In a poll of America's favorite architecture, 76% of buildings selected were traditional and classical. A study of courthouse architecture determined that most non-architects dislike modern design and have done so for almost a century. Yet 92% of new federal government buildings are modern. So there's a genuine mystery to be explained and explored here. If people prefer traditional architecture by a large margin, then why have we stopped producing them? There are certainly more questions than answers, but once you open your eyes, once you see, you can't unsee. Between fires, floods, pandemics, and wars, millions have died, and most structures were destroyed. Some are still there for you to see. Look at St. Petersburg in Russia. Could the next World War destroy what is left of the old world? Question everything while you still can. And that is what we do on Veritas.
You are listening to Veritas. If this is your first time listening, welcome home. To listen to tonight's full interview and all of our material, join the Veritas family and click on the subscribe button at veritasradio.com. Don't forget to visit the Veritas store for Focus Life Force Energy. Get a 15-day free trial of FLFE today. We also have rebounders, pure organic sulfur, flash drives with all our Veritas and Sanitas seasons, and other great products. And if you want to get in touch with Mel, want to be a guest on this radio program, have a guest suggestion, or have feedback, just click on the contact button of our website at veritasradio.com. And now, here's your host, Mel Hostelrick.
Called by Wired Magazine an authority on the Hermetic and alchemical traditions, an erudite conspiracy hunter, Jay Weidner is a renowned author, filmmaker, and scholar, considered to be a modern-day Indiana Jones for his ongoing worldwide quests to find clues to mankind's spiritual destiny via ancient societies and artifacts. His body of work offers a great insight into the circumstances that have led to the current global crisis. Jay Weidner is also a director and producer known for Deep Space, The Last Avatar, and Infinity, The Ultimate Trip, Journey Beyond Death, and others. His website is jayweidner.com, and his own show is on YouTube and is titled Reality Check. And directly from Southern Colorado, I would like to welcome Jay Weidner. Hello, Jay, and welcome back. How are you?
Hey, Mel, it's good to be back.
It's been 12 years since I interviewed first, and the first thing I want to say is this. I remember when I interviewed you first, I asked you what was the eureka moment for you in all of this, and I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, you said something along the lines, I read the book, The Mystery of the Cathedrals by the mysterious French alchemist Fulcanelli. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
And I'm saying this because a lot of information lately, Tartaria, the mud flood, all this resets in the past. I was thinking that I just found out a couple of years, but now I'm thinking that you are the one who started with all of this and Fulcanelli. Do you think there's a correlation between Fulcanelli and all of this stuff that's coming out now about cathedrals and the ancient architecture, or impossible architecture, rather?
I absolutely believe there's a most definite connection, and I'm glad that it's finally getting out. So what we do with Fulcanelli is he wrote 2 books, Mystery of the Cathedrals and Dwellings of the Philosophers. The second book was like a travel log where Fulcanelli goes to different alchemists' houses, both famous and not so famous alchemists, and you know, and for some reason he just goes to all these houses, and then he has drawings made of the houses, and then that's basically the book. So what I did was I went to all these houses, or mansions, really castles, in France, and this was in probably 99 or 90, 99. It's the same year that Stanley Kubrick died, and I began realizing that architecture was alchemy, and that you could build a room or a building where you were transferring etheric energy down into the room, causing, kind of a healing place and a place where vitality is renewed. And that's what the cathedrals were. And that's what these alchemists' mansion houses were. They were specially built in that Tartarian fashion, with the spires, and which draws down the telluric energies, and that the whole entire civilization was massive, and it was everywhere, and it has been destroyed. And it was literally almost all of Russia, China. The Great Wall of China has these rooms. About every 300 yards or so, there will be a little room where the guards can go to get out of the rain and snow, right? And the fascinating thing is that the rooms where the guards go are on the not on the China side. In other words, they're on the other side of the wall, the side facing supposedly the enemies. So that brings to mind as to whether the Great Wall of China was designed to protect China from hordes, or was it designed to keep the Chinese out of Tartaria, which was just north of there? So we see that there was this gigantic alchemical civilization that was all over the world, in Japan and Australia, China, Russia, everywhere, including probably the United States. And this alchemical civilization was completely wiped out of history, completely. And we don't even know how it was wiped out. We only know from hints from Fulcanelli that there are books that will tell you the truth, but you have to find them. I haven't found them, and I've been on a mad dash look, and I haven't found any books that talk about, because here's the thing, these buildings are all still around. So they would have crumbled into the ground, for the most part, been done thousands of years ago. But they weren't, and they aren't. And so they look like they were built like, 600 or 700 years ago, like the cathedrals were. And, we have to ask ourselves, who funded all this, and where did they go? Where did those people go? And why is their history completely gone? And we know the Russians, the KGB had a special bureau that was designed just for the sole purpose of removing Tartarian history from history books. And so they were around for about 60 years, just destroying all remnants of the history of this incredible country, or whatever it was. And someone overthrew that civilization, inherited the buildings, but didn't know how to make them work anymore. And so they just kind of refurbished the buildings to suit their current needs, and the buildings kind of got turned off, you might say, or grounded. And now today, Chartres Cathedral has been given a metal roof, so it's been shorted out. It no longer works. Notre Dame's roof has been burned, and they're probably going to replace it with some kind of metal, and that's going to ground out Notre Dame. And so we're seeing that because we're so lame and stupid, we don't even know what we're doing. And we've lost incredible civilizations, it's been drained away. And it's a real pity, because we're literally replacing these buildings with metal and steel buildings, which are the exact opposite. They actually repel the etheric powers that are all around us, the plasma energy, and so we're killing ourselves, essentially.
It seems that once you open your eyes to these buildings, and before you know it, you see every building more or less the same. This is prettier. This is, a square. It's probably been made in the last 40, 50 years. But once you open your eyes, I was just recently in New York City again, and I started walking the streets and noticing so many of these buildings. And of course, they have the aged copper. It's oxidized on top, so it's kind of greenish, bluish. But you could tell that at one point it was just pure copper. And I took a picture of this magnificent building in New York City, and right in front of it, there's a parking lot, a hourly parking lot. So the old world meets the ugly new world. But do you think the last two world wars were done to destroy the old world?
Oh, well, definitely. And, the firebombing in Germany of the towns, especially
Dresden.
I'm going to forget now. Dresden had the most beautiful. Go Google Dresden 1900 and go to images and look at Dresden, what it looked like, and tell me if this wasn't the most beautiful city ever, maybe. And it was firebombed, and yeah, that's exactly right. And wow, it's just been awful. And it's the same forces that are at work that are both, in the KGB, removing history, and also the same forces that are running the banks and rewriting history and choosing to say with their science that the material world is the only world that exists. And so we're kind of caught with this very corrupt group of people who, came out of Central Europe and more or less killed all of the old civilization. And again, it's an untold story. We don't have it in our history books or anything, so we can't even tell you when this happened, really. And then there's the other problem, and this is a real daunting problem. I know people will say that you can go 1,000 years without advancing anything. But if you actually look at the years 400 AD when Rome fell to 1400 AD when the first ships started sailing out of Spain and Portugal to go around the world and discover the world, you'll see that there isn't one advancement in anything. Not in weapons, not in ships, not in architecture, not in the way that we build. It's as if there's like 1,000 years where everything either stopped or something. And I suspect that once we figure out the reason why we didn't have any advancements in any of the technologies that were the same exact technologies 1,000 years later, then we'll also have the answer to what happened to this mysterious civilization that vanished and left behind these buildings, which frankly we cannot build today. We don't have the artisans. We don't have the people that can sculpt and do the brickwork, and we just don't have it. And so, we're not going to get it back. So a real terrible thing happened to us, and I don't know when. I suspect it happened around 1000 AD is what I think. Just about 1,000 years ago, I think, is when this thing happened. And I believe that when Pope Sylvester II took the popery, that was when the rewriting of everything began. And why they rewrote it, I don't know. But it could be that they were trying to rewrite the calendar so that they would be the leaders in the year 1000. So because they thought that was when Jesus would return, because he said he would come back in a millennia. And so they figured that it was 1033 would be the year that Jesus would return. And so they wanted to be, Otto wanted to be the emperor, and Sylvester wanted to be the pope. And they sort of started massaging history and dating to get this to match, is what I suspect. But how I can prove any of this is way beyond, my abilities, because, limited resources and time. I can't travel to Europe like I used to and be able to go through books and libraries and search, because the COVID just kind of destroyed everything. And I don't want to go there now. So it's a tough one. And yes, you're right. It was really Fulcanelli that brought out the fact that there were mysterious group of people built the cathedrals, and that they were alchemy. The buildings themselves were alchemical, and finally it got spread out into the larger public. And I'm very, very thankful for all the researchers that are going out and doing it. But I want to caution all of you: do not use the buildings from the World's Fairs as some of your examples. Those buildings are just Hollywood sets. They're made out of plaster. They're thrown up really quickly. They're used molds. The Chicago World's Fair was built in 3 years before 1892 when it opened. The entire Chicago had been burned down by the greatest fire the United States had ever seen in 1871. There was no buildings left. It was completely fried. Jackson Park, where the World's Fair took place in 1892, was completely burned to the ground. All the trees were burned. Everything was burned. Nothing survived. So, it's a big misnomer within the community that these World Fairs were somehow these older buildings that they refurbished and then tore down. But what they did do, and I'm an eyewitness to this, they did tear down these old buildings that were in cities all across the United States and Canada in the 1950s and the 1960s. My parents' generation completely destroyed all of the old parts of all of the downtowns in America. They were all torn down. I watched these amazing buildings that, to this day, I can actually get on Google and look at these buildings and go, my God, how did they build this? And, there's all sorts of, I'll pick a building that is just magnificent. And then, in a town somewhere. And then I will go and try to find out the history of the building and everything. And I've done this now with 3 different buildings. And I swear to God, I could never find the history or pictures of it being built or anything. And they are really aged, much more than they would be if they were built in, say, 1860 or 1870. The buildings that still exist. But I watched entire city blocks go down. I was actually living in downtown Omaha, and they passed a law. They're going to raise all these buildings. And I literally watched I don't know, 5 or 6 city blocks of these Tartarian buildings completely torn down and crumbled, and I lived in one of them. And they said they passed a law, we'll save the arch from this building that I was living in, because my building was also marked for takedown. And my building was built, they said, in the 1880s. It had 12-foot doors. I'll never forget. This is in the early 1970s. It had 12-foot steel doors as an entrance. The rooms were all 14 feet high, which didn't make any sense to me because, all the heat rises to the top in the winter, and it's cold there in the winter. Why would you build a 14-foot high room? And the entire building was this way. And so I've actually experienced these buildings, and this one was short-circuited also because the people that owned it didn't know what to do with it. But these buildings are everywhere, and they do have odd features to them. There's a really old building in downtown Colorado Springs that I went to see. I was walking past it one day about a year ago, and I said, I'm going to go check this building out, So I go, and again, it's really weathered, and it's got the 14-foot high rooms and the building. And then I went up to the outside, and the windows to the basement were like 7 feet below street level. And so they literally had to build a culvert around the window, right? Because it was so far down. And I thought, that is really stupid, because when it rains, this thing's going to fill up, right? I still to this day can't understand it, but it really did look as if the building had been somehow 8 or 9 feet of mud had been around it, and they just had to dig it out, later. And for the life of me, I never thought that I'd ever be saying any of this stuff. But the more I look into it, the more I realize that there's something amiss here. How can it take 120 years to build a cathedral in Europe, but it takes 10 years to build a cathedral in Salt Lake City? With the same building materials, no electricity, just horseback and oxen, ropes and ladders, and they did it. And they do the same in Omaha. They built St. Catherine's Cathedral, which is the big cathedral in Omaha, and you can't really find hardly any records of it being erected. And so that's what I would tell researchers is, find a building in your area that matches all these qualities. It's old, it's got maybe spires on it, or it did at least at one time, and then try to go into the city records and try to find if you can get a history of it, pictures of it being built, and I bet that you probably can't.
No, you can't. And you're opening more doors. I love it. Have you been to Barcelona?
Pardon me?
Have you been to Barcelona, Spain?
I have. Beautiful.
So you remember the Sagrada Familia, the church there. This thing has been under construction since 1882. And it's still under construction. But then, folks, I want you to go to Google Images. Yeah, sometimes Google is good for certain things. Go to Google Images and just type in Penn Station, Old Pennsylvania Station, and take a look at it. This was built between the years 1904 and 1910, allegedly, when we only had horse and buggies and maybe some cars. And it was demolished in 1963, I believe, so it only lasted for 53 years? But take a look inside. Do you really think that this was built at that time? And you probably have seen this too, the panoramic picture of San Francisco in the late 1800s, where you can see the entire city. You hardly see any people, but that was supposed to have been built in just a few years, the entire city of San Francisco. And again, I used to think this can be possible. Why would they be lying to us? But as you said, the Bolsheviks, they had their own division to completely eradicate anything that had to do with Tartaria. All our history, all these buildings, I believe they harnessed electricity from the ether. The higher they were, the more electricity they would take. Also, instead of seeing, fireplaces, they had something else. They were able to warm the entire building by having perhaps copper around inside the cement, and that cement was hardening with time. They would last for hundreds and hundreds of years. And what you said about the 1,000 years, Jay, what if those 1,000 years never existed?
It may be true. I don't know. It's just like, how do you investigate? Where do you even begin investigating something like this? I do know that, the dating system, it did switch around 1400 or so, where it was I instead of a 1 in front of the numbers, in the name of in the year of our Lord,
or a J,
or a J, yeah, or year of Jesus, right? And so it begs so many questions, and what happened? And we know that we've been hit by plasma storms, and we know that when meteorites go by, when we go through the tail of a comet, we frequently have gigantic fires. And there's kind of a hard correlation there, but I have no idea why. But and we know that the greatest fires in United States history happened between 1820 and 1920. And we're talking some serious fires here. Not the same day that the Chicago fire happened in 1871, there was a gigantic fire in Upper Michigan, a gigantic fire in Wisconsin, and somewhere else. I believe there was like 4 fires within 500 square miles of each other that were the most bizarre fires from the witness descriptions ever. The fire came from above. The tops of the trees got lit first. It sounded like a hurricane, they said, when it was approaching. They said it sounded like a gigantic hurricane was approaching, and then a 80-mile-an-hour wind would suddenly hit, a little small town, and the fire would come from the sky and it would burn the tops of the buildings down, and the fires would melt buildings in like Quebec and in Boston and in San Francisco. In San Francisco, it not just melted the buildings, it looks like a nuclear bomb went off or something, if you look at those pictures. And in Chicago, how could you have a fire? All the buildings were stone, so yes, the insides would burn because the insides were wood, but why would the outside burn? And that has to be a pretty hot fire. And it didn't just stop in 1920. In 2020, there was fires in Northern California and in Oregon that are still really difficult to explain, and almost like directed fires of some kind. And so, I'll tell you what, you're right about the Bolsheviks too, by the way. I'm glad you said it, not me. But
you mean the same Bolsheviks that are here now?
Pardon me?
Do you mean the same Bolsheviks that are here now trying to do the same thing?
Yeah. So that's all they'd ever do is destroy history because, I don't know. I really don't like Bolsheviks, and I actually can't even. I understand them because of their actions, but I can't explain their psychology at all, except that they seem like, I don't know. I can't say that. When I read Bolshevik history, it makes my hair stand on end, and I fear that the Bolsheviks are going to try to take over, this country. And
that's what I just said. That's exactly what I just said. The same Bolsheviks are here now trying to do the same thing, but this time they want to do it worldwide.
Right. They blame the United States for all their failures in the past. They say that we interfered and caused them to fail. If we just get rid of the United States, we'll finally succeed. But it can't succeed because it's inherently not a grassroots phenomena. It didn't happen from grassroots. It was Rothschilds appointed Karl Marx to write it up. And then Marx and Engels got together and kind of even made it more substantial. So, so the whole thing is almost feels anti-human, I guess. And Fulcanelli assures us in Mystery of the Cathedrals, he goes out of his way to assure us that the Dark Ages were not the Dark Ages. And he says that they were anything but the Dark Ages. So the Dark Ages supposedly ended around 1000 to 1100 AD, when the Great Warming of Europe occurred. So around 1000 AD, Europe began warming up to the point where you could grow grapes like in Scotland. And this precipitated, supposedly the great building of the cathedrals and this whole thing. But, what were the Dark Ages? Okay, Rome fell in 400, and for 600 years, nothing happens. Just nothing happens. And I guess people just kind of mete out an existence, and, there's, really not much going on. And then all of a sudden, everything starts happening in 1000 AD, and it's like the whole place gets charged up and everything starts happening again. And, you can't even really track leaders and popes and stuff before 1000 AD. It's very difficult. And you ask yourself, was Charlemagne really for real? Is he a made-up character? That would certainly, Charlemagne is a made-up character who is about 7 different people put into one. There's no way that Charlemagne could have done all the things that Charlemagne did in his life in 62 years, period. No way. And especially not in those days. So the whole thing, just speaks of some kind of massive cover-up that it was successful. That's what's kind of scary about it. It was incredibly successful cover-up. And let's not forget what the British did in India. So when the Indians did their rebellion against the British, and I think it was, 1870, something like that, the British, they friggin' destroyed the place. I mean, they went from temple to temple and just used cannonballs and blew the hell out of everything. And if you look at the pictures of the temples in India India Civil War, we're talking breathtaking. We're talking 300-foot walls. We're talking gigantic rotundas, incredible statues. I mean, it was just like the British were just hell-bent on destroying it all, making sure that the Indians had no idea of what their history is. And now it worked because they don't.
Well, I can see this happening in Europe a lot, but in the United States, when you see all these buildings in major cities like New York, Illinois, San Francisco, you wonder, could these buildings have been here before honestly, Jay, and this may sound ridiculous, but I even wonder if Christopher Columbus is a made-up character.
I don't know if he's made up, but he was definitely, first off, he wasn't really a Templar. So he put the Templar flags on his masts for a reason. And the reason is that the Templars had already been in America. Henry Sinclair had been in America in 1300 and in 1200. The Sinclairs had been going back and forth. The Templars had been in America for a long time before Columbus. They gave Columbus the maps. And because the Templars were friendly with the Indians, Columbus put a Templar mast on his thing, a cross on his mast, so that the Native Americans would be cool with him, and so that was even designed. So the Templars are part of this. I don't know what part they played, but I believe the Templars and the Tartarians are somehow related to each other. And we know it was the Templars that brought alchemy into Europe and financed the buildings of all these big buildings all over Europe, and where they got their money, how they did it, nobody knows. But I believe, for instance, that San Francisco was a Templar outpost, a Templar Tartarian outpost, and that I have pictures of San Francisco that were taken, panoramas that were taken in somewhere between in the 1850s. We'll just conclude that they were taken in 1859 to give them as much time as possible to do all of this, okay? So we'll say all these pictures were taken in 1859. Okay, San Francisco became a municipality in 1848, became a city in 1849, had 1,000 people in it in 1849. By 1851, it had 10,000 people because of the gold rush. And by 1859, it had about 25,000 people in it. You're going to tell me that 25,000 people, mostly miners, built literally hundreds of buildings, at least two, but I think three, I can't tell, but at least two cathedrals, and they did it all in 10 years. That's what history is trying to tell us. Also, if you start going through the history of San Francisco, I used to live there, so I have a kind of a soft spot in my heart for San Francisco. If you look at the history of San Francisco, they definitely, they'll be, 1881, the St. Francis Hotel started construction. Okay, great. That could be, yeah. Okay, 1890, the Bank of America started construction. Okay. That's all great and fine and everything, but what about the other 800 buildings? How come there's nothing in the history books about them and when they started getting constructed? What about the cathedrals that are there? There's clearly two cathedrals, at least in the 1850s in San Francisco. So you're telling me they built an entire cathedral, and this is a cathedral with those Russian balls,
right.
The puff balls. This cathedral has those Russian puff balls on it.
Orthodox.
Which, again, now think about this. San Francisco was the first white people in Northern California were the Russians. The Russian River is just north of San Francisco. We bought that land from the Russians. That's where we bought all that land from. The Russians had it. So what were the Russians doing there, right? Or the Russians were the Tartarians. Okay, and they were there, and so the whole thing gets more and more incredible as you examine it.
Well, again, folks, go to Google and just type 1877 panoramic photo of San Francisco. And what Jay's saying, 1840s, the city was founded. So in 30-some years, take a look at that panoramic picture and tell me if that was built by miners using rudimentary tools in just 20, 30 years. Even in today's day and age, it would be impossible.
Yeah, I've seen a manifest for a boat that's landed in Honolulu in 1836. And on the manifest, it said that it left the port of San Francisco in 1836. There was no port in San Francisco in 1836. The port in San Francisco didn't arrive until in the early 1850s when the miners started coming in. They put the port in really fast. That's what they say anyway. But, the whole thing in San Francisco is like, really, if you can unwind that one and unpack that one, then you can figure out, I think, all the rest, because it just doesn't seem possible. And the way that, forget the guy's name, the first Spanish explorer coming up the West Coast supposedly went right by the Golden Gate and didn't go in to the bay. Does that make sense? Come on.
Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo.
Yeah, when you're out at sea and you see an opening like that, first thing you do is you lower a cup down to the water in front of the opening, and you taste the water. If the water is sweeter than the salt water, you know that you've hit a freshwater opening, and you go in there, get water. But they didn't do that. They went right by it. But did they go right by it? I say no, they didn't. I say they knew exactly what they were doing, because where did the Templars go when they left? France, Spain, and and then all of a sudden, as soon as the Templars go to Spain, then all of a sudden Spain becomes a shipping empire and exploring empire, and so does Portugal, where the Templars also went. And so there is this odd connection between the Templars and this ancient Tartarian thing. And the Templars were probably a secret society within Europe, and had been a secret society for maybe a really, really long time before anyone knew that they really truly existed. And about that, after that, I can't. The history gets so vague, I can't really tell you more than that.
I really have started getting into the Templars and the Hospitallers and why they were disbanded by Pope Clement V, the French Pope. But they kept moving around. They kept moving around to Spain, as you said, and then they went to Cyprus, and then finally to Malta. And we hear all the time the Knights of Malta. And I've said this story before. We used to have an American who used to be working in law enforcement in Seattle many, many years ago. And apparently he started looking into corruption. Just a quick story. And he was left for dead in Seattle, but he woke up and left the country to El Salvador. They thought he was dead. And then he remarried down there, and he got in touch with me for years and started sending me all this incredible information. He was living very close to the largest U.S. embassy in the Western Hemisphere, which is in El Salvador. And the street or the avenue where it is called the Knights of Malta Avenue. And he took pictures of cars, European cars getting into the embassy, all of them with Nazi signs. Any idea what this could be? The actual Nazi insignia in the U.S. Embassy on the Knights of Malta Avenue in El Salvador.
Well, I mean, the Nazis would call themselves the Templars. And the New Templars, they call themselves. So, let me put it to you this way: the secret society presence in Central America, especially Costa Rica, is huge, and I don't know why, but it is. It's huge, and also it's got a huge presence in Argentina and Chile. There's a huge presence of these Templar German Europeans that are doing weird experiments, and so I don't know. It's you read what's his name? Peter
Lavenda.
I can't remember his name. I can't remember. Anyway, I'll come up with his name in a minute. But he actually went to a German town in the.
You mean Chile. Peter Lavenda?
Yeah, Lavenda, thank you. And good guy, great researcher. And that was a scary moment. But yeah, so what I think is going on is they're commandeering the ancient tunnel systems that are in the Andes and in the mountains in Central America. I think that's what's going on. They're commandeering it. There's a lot of literature about the Germans taking the tunnel systems in Peru and in Chile. And of course, we know that the tunnel systems in the United States were taken by the U.S. government and the military. We got trains running around underneath the ground and stuff, and especially here in the American Southwest. So yeah, we know that all this is real. I mean, it's not like a fable or something. Uh, John Dean, the guy that turned coat on Nixon, he wrote a book about his experiences working for Nixon. It was a big bestseller on the New York Times many, many years ago, late 70s maybe. And there's a passage in the book saying that one of his favorite things to do was to stay late at night and drink brandy with a CIA guy whose name escapes me, who would regale us with stories about his explorations of the tunnel systems under New Mexico and Arizona. It was just a throwaway line, but very revealing throwaway line. So yeah, these guys are all connected in, and now these organizations are falling. They're falling away in power. So you don't have to be a Freemason anymore to be president of the United States. You don't have to be involved in any of the secret societies anymore to be involved in the United States, because those secret societies that held these once great secrets are no longer the same. They've been infiltrated by the Bolsheviks. And so now the Bolsheviks have infiltrated all the secret societies that were holding all these incredible spiritual secrets, and have basically ravaged them and gotten rid of all of the interesting stuff, and just left behind more like just a men's business club or something. And so, you can go become a Freemason. You're not going to learn anything. You're not going to be running the world or anything, because they don't run the world anymore. A whole new group of people has taken over from these secret societies. And I think that's, what 9/11 was about. I think, if you were a 33rd degree or higher Freemason on, the evening of September 11th, 2001, your first thought is, holy crap, the three main symbols in our Freemasonic Lodge are Joachim and Boaz, two pillars, and a pentagon. That's in every Freemasonic Lodge. That's what you have. You have two pillars, and then on the wall they'll have a pentagon, and that's their most sacred symbols. And that's why the pentagon was built on crescent. They cracked the dirt for the building of the Pentagon on September 11th, 1941, exactly 60 years before September 11th, 2001. And so this is some kind of holy day for whatever group this new group is. So I believe that September 11th was the destruction of the old guard and the insertion of a new guard, a new group that was taking over. And if you look at our world since 2001, you can see the corporations went from being basically Republican to being incredibly liberal Democrat.
Yeah.
You can see that all the institutions, like our law enforcement agencies, have all been taken over by these forces. And we're at the cusp now where they are attempting to so whatever you want to say about the Freemasons and the Templars and all those guys, they had a kind of a moral compass, and they believed in right and wrong, and they did conspiracies. I'm not saying they didn't, but they believed in paying their bills, and they believed in at least some rudimentary forms of justice. But this new group that's been in since 2001, these guys don't care about any of that. They're completely amoral. All they want is money and sex, and they've now taken over, I believe, almost every single institution we have, including now, sadly enough, science. So science has now been taken over too. And this group, uses BS words like consensus. Well, science can't ever have a consensus. That's not what science is. Science isn't a vote. Give me a break. Science is experiment, and then see what happens. And if your experiment succeeds, you have to do the experiment again. It succeeds twice, and you have to do this over and over and over. And that's what science is. But science now changed. The whole thing has changed, and now we're on the verge of the 1%ers pulling the switch and most of the body.
I'm losing you, by the way. Can you hear me? I'm losing you, Jay.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you were cutting off. But what you were saying that
Really?
Yeah,
Can you hear?
I can hear you now. So you think that we have been taken over since 2001? 2001, it feels totally different. We usually say, BC or AE or AD. Now they changed that to what is it, BCE and after ACE. So you think that we should be saying before 9/11 and after 9/11?
Yeah, I do. I think if you look at, if you look at movies, which I do, I look at movies as a barometer or taking the temperature of your culture. So if a movie's a big hit, then I generally want to see it because I want to know why everybody's going to see this movie, right? So, I look at it that way. Like if there's a big hit horror film, I go look at it because I know it's telling me something about the psychology of the country or the world, wherever made this film popular. And if you look at the movies after 2001, movies were they still carried on pretty good until I believe 2005, 2006, when movies started losing their quality. And they started losing their ability to tell a story. They started losing their ability to actually have good acting. And the CGI began invading the landscape, and so everything started looking clunky and fakey, and just movies lost all grit. And by 2009, when Avatar came, I think Avatar was probably the last surge of old Hollywood, you might say, and it was all CGI, of course, which was now the rage everywhere, but Avatar still at least had a decent story. And then after 2009, movies have just been terrible, and they just get worse and worse and worse. And I haven't seen a really good movie in years. And so, I think that's how I gauge it. And I can see that they're just not as well made as they used to be. They're just not as well written as they used to be. And there's a steady decline in the culture. And I believe that's because the same group fully infiltrated the media business, Hollywood, and began injecting propaganda into the movies. So after around 2005 or so, I would go to see a movie, and the first 5 minutes of the movie, I'd be trying to figure out what kind of political message this movie is trying to sell me. That never happened before. That never happened. I never had that happen.
Well, look at it now.
Just
China
Yep.
owns so many movie theaters and movie production companies. And, you probably remember the movie Red Dawn from 1984, and then they remade it in the 2000s, and they had to stop production and redo the movie because China said, hell no, you're not going to be putting us in that bad light. Change it to North Korea. So they had to change the whole thing. It was a flop of a movie, but if you look at the original one, so now we cannot say anything about China. And even in the United States right now, freedom of speech. I'm going to be talking in code now because certain words, as you know, the AI flags it. But this alleged massacre that happened, and even by me saying alleged, that could get me in trouble. But the one where AJ was recently of a judgment of $1 billion. And there's some people who say that he's control opposition. Some people believe that he's not. I'm in the middle with this, but I think the bottom line is there was a message sent out to anyone who questions the narrative. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's even more chilling than that. It's if you speculate about a crime, it's saying that the victim of the crime can sue you. So how are you going to solve crime if you aren't going to? I mean, I don't even get it. For investigative journalists, that's what you do. You speculate. You wonder what this happened. What is it? I'm saying that if I do that in public, I can get sued by the victim of the crime. You think the victim of the crime would want me? Look at the crime and speculate as to what's really going on. It's chilling, and all I want to say about all of that is I don't understand. AJ didn't defend himself. I can't understand this. I mean, he didn't even. He brought up. I'm not going to get into it. I don't want you to get. But I mean, there's a lot of evidence I could have brought up that would have defended my position, and would have at least thrown doubt into the whole scene. As I say, there's a lot of odd occurrences, and so I looked at that and I said, that's weird that there's so many occurrences. I wonder what's really going on here. But he just kind of let him roll right over him, and I don't know why. Maybe he just thought it was a lost cause, and it doesn't have a way, but very chilling thing.
So we'll take a break. Jay, tell us once again your website and your show and so on.
jweidner.com. And I have a show on YouTube called Reality Check, and my films are at sacredmysteries.com and Gaia.com.
Excellent. We have one more hour to come with Jay Weidner. This is Mel Hostlerich, and you are listening to Veritas. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you for listening to the first part of this important Veritas interview. To listen to the rest and all of our material, proceed to the members section or join the Veritas family by subscribing. Click on the subscribe button at veritasradio.com. Subscribe today. Don't forget to visit the Veritas store for Focus Life Force Energy. Get a 15-day free trial of FLFE today. We also have rebounders, pure organic sulfur, flash drives with all our Veritas and Sanitas seasons, and other great products. And if you want to get in touch with Mel, want to be a guest on this radio program, have a guest suggestion, or have feedback, just click on the contact button of our website at veritasradio.com. And if you're listening on YouTube, like, subscribe, and share the video. Click on the notification button to be alerted when new interviews are available. Now proceed to the member section or subscribe to listen to the rest of the interview. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for listening to Veritas. Because you don't want to believe, you want to know.